Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a massive, epic story. We're talking about unparalleled ambition, sheer military genius, and, well, ultimate ruin. We're looking at a man who quite literally grabbed history by the collar and completely reshaped the world's borders and laws. Yep, Napoleon Bonaparte. We're going to explore his crazy rise to power, his crushing defeats, and that highly debated legacy of his. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly does a fairly average kid from a tiny island end up conquering a massive continent? We hear the basics. Born in 1769 on the remote island of Corsica. But what's really crucial to grasp here is just how far outside the elite, wealthy French aristocracy his family actually was. This relatively average outsider kid shouldn't have even been a footnote in French royal history, yet he'd grow up to command armies of millions and just crush the greatest empires of his day. The speed of his rise up the ranks, it is absolutely staggering. He was sent off to military academies in France when he was just 9 years old. He was this isolated, stubborn kid, but he used that solitude to just study relentlessly. So when the French Revolution created this massive power vacuum in 1789, he was ready. By 1793, his brilliant use of artillery at the Siege of Toulon defeats the British, and boom, he skyrockets to brigadier general at just 24 years old. So let's see how he built this legendary reputation. In his 1796 Italy campaign, he used these brilliant divide-and-conquer tactics to absolutely devastate Austria. Then comes Egypt in 1798. He wins the epic Battle of the Pyramids. Now, sure, the French Navy got completely crushed by Nelson shortly after. But what's really interesting here is that this campaign wasn't just military. Napoleon actually brought an entire team of scientists with him to Egypt. And that directly led to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. that literally changed our understanding of ancient history forever. So, despite that naval disaster in Egypt, Napoleon manages to slip back to France in 1799. And thanks to some heavy propaganda, he's welcomed as a conquering hero. But, military fame just wasn't enough for him. He looks around Paris, sees a weakened, shaky government, and decides to turn that prestige into sheer political dominance. He executes the coup of 18 Brumaire, effectively overthrowing the government, and immediately installs himself as first consul. In just a few short years, that lonely kid from Corsica had opportunistically made himself the absolute dictator of one of the most powerful nations on Earth. Section 1. Emperor and the Napoleonic Code, Rebuilding a Nation. Picture this. It's 1804, and Napoleon takes a step that absolutely shocks Europe. Inside the magnificent Notre Dame Cathedral, he is about to be crowned emperor. Now, traditionally, the Pope would place the crown on the monarch's head, right? It symbolizes that the right to rule comes from God. But Napoleon, he doesn't do that. He actually takes the crown right out of the Pope's hands and physically places it on his own head. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how he viewed himself. His power didn't come from the church, it didn't come from divine right. It came entirely from his own merit, his own victories, and his own raw ambition. As emperor, he kicks off these massive administrative reforms that basically drag France into the modern era. The crown jewel here was the Napoleonic Code, which established legal equality, secured property rights, and enforced secularism. But he didn't stop there. He stabilized the whole economy with the Bank of France, totally revamped education by setting up high schools and universities, and created the Legion of Honor to reward actual merit. He also effectively ended feudalism and expanded civil rights to marginalized groups like the Jewish population. And here's why this matters today, folks. These incredibly efficient reforms were exported across Europe, and they actually still form the fundamental basis of civil law in many countries around the globe right now. This era between 1805 and 1807, this is his undisputed golden age. Yeah, okay, he suffered a devastating naval defeat to the British at Trafalgar in 1805, meaning he could never invade Britain. But on land, the guy was practically invincible. Later that same year, he won what's widely considered his absolute tactical masterpiece, the Battle of Austerlitz. He decisively crushed the combined Russian and Austrian forces. And he just kept going, staggering victories at Jena, Friedland, Wagram. By 1807, his massive Grand Army had effectively redrawn the map of Europe. The French Empire stretched all the way from Spain in the west to Poland in the east. He quite literally made his own brothers and sisters kings and queens of the nations he conquered. So the crucial point here is how incredibly fast extreme success can breed fatal overconfidence. On one side, you've got Austerlitz in 1805. That represents masterful, calculated strategy that built an expansive empire. But right next to that peak is his fatal flaw, unchecked, blind ambition. And that ambition hit its absolute limit in 1812, when he decided to launch a massive invasion of Russia. He genuinely believed he was unbeatable. Well, he was wrong. 600,000. That is the massive number of troops Napoleon marched into Russia in 1812. But the Russian army, they were smart. They refused to fight him on his terms. Instead, they just continually retreated, pulling him deeper and deeper into their vast, empty territory. When Napoleon finally reaches Moscow, he finds it completely burned to the ground by the Russians themselves. There was no food, no shelter, and definitely no surrender. Forced to retreat right in the middle of a brutal, unforgiving Russian winter, his invincible Grand Army was just decimated. More than half of those 600,000 men died, freezing to death in the snow or starving by the side of the road. It was a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound, and honestly, he'd never really recover from it. After that, the momentum of his downfall was just chaotic and incredibly swift. Smelling blood in the water, a coalition of European powers united and finally defeated him at the massive Battle of Leipzig in 1813. By 1814, Paris is captured, he's forced to step down, and they exile him to the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba. But come on, Napoleon wasn't done. In this wild, miraculous event known as the 100 Days, he actually escapes. He returns to France and, unbelievably, reclaims his throne in 1815. But this comeback was pretty short-lived. On June 18, 1815, at the legendary Battle of Waterloo, he faced a decisive final defeat against the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian commander Blücher. This time, they weren't taking any chances. He was exiled to the incredibly remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he died in 1821 at just 51 years old. Section 2. Napoleon's Controversial Legacy. Looking back, it's clear he left a deeply, deeply complicated imprint on history. On the positive side, his legal reforms, especially the Napoleonic Code, genuinely laid the foundation for the modern, secular, organized state across Europe. He spread concepts of equality before the law and even sparked the early seeds of modern nationalism. But we have to look at the negative impacts too, because those advancements were paid for with a horrifying toll. His relentless military campaigns caused the deaths of millions of soldiers and civilians. Entire swaths of European lands were just ravaged. A whole generation of young men was wiped out, all driven by the unchecked ambition of one single man. The reality is, his legacy really doesn't offer us a simple hero or a simple villain. Napoleon Bonaparte's life is basically a masterclass in how soaring brilliance and devastating failures can equally define someone's greatness. I mean, the guy rose from absolute obscurity to rule almost everything, only to lose it all in the freezing snows of Russia and the muddy fields of Waterloo. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. Looking at this incredible rise and his catastrophic fall, was ambition Napoleon's greatest virtue? The very thing that allowed him to modernize the world? Or was it his ultimate curse? Take a second to think about what impresses you the most about his story. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we will see you next time.